person, if I don't have two relations, but I don't always have a dual relationship, there's something not true. And the dual relationship is my God and the God of my fathers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm only in the God of my fathers, ultimately the tradition can't be received and transmuted and regenerated and recreated anew. I need to be receiving deeply from the God of my fathers. And that's really this deep kind of patriarchal notion, you know, patriarchal, matriarchal. I'm receiving from my mother and father. Shema bani musar avicha va'al titosh Torah imecha. Right? Receive the transmission, right? The ethics of father, the Torah, the Dharma of mother. At the same time, he says, if it remains the God of my fathers, the God of my mothers, but it doesn't become my God, right? It's not my God and the God of my fathers, then ultimately it will. You know, on the other hand, right? You know, if it's only my God, right? If it's not, you know, the God of my fathers and mothers, it's not rooted, it's not nourished, which was the word that you used. So he talks about this kind of, you know, dual relationship that always exists. And I think it's very beautiful and very true. Just as an aside, Brother B, I think in general dual relationships are more true than we allow them. We like to compartmentalize. You know, sometimes, you know, avoiding dual relationships are important. So, for example, a psychoanalyst and his patient. You know, but that very formal place where there's a very particular contract. You know, there's a contract to avoid dual relationships in many, many, many other relationships. And sometimes they include teacher and student. Sometimes they include, you know, employer and employee. Right? The truth and genuine nature of things is always a dual relationship. And dual relationships are very beautiful. And we have a dual relationship, you know, to God. And our dual relationship is, you know, it's the God that appears in me and my own creativity, in my unique self, and my particularly textured and nuanced, you know, refracted prism of divinity that appears only and only through me. And there's the complete submission, you know, to God and God of my fathers. And we each kind of hold them both. And I myself, maybe this last sentence, you know, I went to a Maine. You know, I went to you know, through a number of stages in my life. You know, I kind of grew up, you know, in Orthodoxy, and all Orthodoxy is in some sense fundamentalist. You know, it doesn't matter whether you go to your medical school or not to medical school. The basic Orthodox position is fundamentalist in a kind of profound way, and in a very beautiful way in many ways. And so I grew up kind of in a place of profound submission. You know, and then, you know, as the years went on, for a lot of reasons, you know, biography is always theology. You know, it's never about a theological move. It's about, you know, where your life takes you, what are the challenges, what are the pains, what are the shatterings, what are the ecstasies of your life, and biography and theology really integrate with each other in a very deep way. But as my biography and theology integrated, you know, I moved more towards a more expanded, if you will, you know, renewed vision, you know, of Hebrew wisdom. But as I did that, you know, I found that my friends on the path really had in a very, really profound way lost the notion of submission. You know, lost the notion of, you know, God of my fathers. And then some of my practices, I lost it as well. You know, that we went for post-conventional without sufficiently honoring the conventional. And one of the things I'm trying to kind of come back now and integrate is to really integrate those two, you know, both in my own life, my own practice, and my own commitments, you know, in my own, you know, study, studenting, and teaching, you know, and in the tradition itself. Because what happens is, you know, I would say in the last year, you know, before I went into a retreat mode, which has been really, you know, painful and ecstatic and wonderful, you know, I really felt like I had fallen into the source code. You know, I was in, you know, whether it was Zoharic texts, you know, that I was reading by myself or with a study partner, or whether it was Izbaka, whether it was Talmudic texts, whether it was recovering kind of rituals that I kind of intuited existed in the old Beit Midrash, and I began to re-understand them, rituals that we had lost in the Holocaust. I really felt like I had fallen into the source code. But I think what happens is when you fall into the source code, you can sometimes get so delighted, you know, the shadow of delight, you know, with your own, you know, revelation, with the ecstasy of it all, with the gorgeousness of it all, that you kind of lose for a moment your anchor in the God of our fathers. And that those two kind of need to be integrated. And when they're not integrated, you know, there's kind of a shattering that happens so that the vessels can break. And then, as they always are in Kabbalah, after the vessels break, they're rewoven, they're retextured, they're reintegrated, from a kind of more humble, more beautiful place, and then we move again towards the expansion, but in a different way. So to kind of set that as the context of our conversation is like something that I completely appreciate and receive, and I'm just so really happy and delighted again that you set that up as a frame.
Yeah, I want to just make a brief note, and I want to just drop a tantalization, perhaps, and then move on to, I think, address kind of the mainstream of our conversation. But you said sometimes dual relationships, I don't remember your wording, but have a kind of a fullness and a radiance beyond what we give them, but
right.
beyond what we and beyond what we're able to receive from them. Might be another way of putting it in the frame of our conversations, that there's a radiance and fullness there that we have until now not maybe really received. One of the ways that I've really worked with this and looked at this, there's this, and this is a topic of a whole different conversation, I think, but it's legitimate duality in relation to literal duality. And that when we see beyond literal duality, we often estrange ourselves, unable to receive the legitimate duality.
So tell me more about that.
Well, I was kind of hoping to leave that dangling for the moment, but we can definitely come back and play there a bit more. You want to play there a bit more now, or do you mind?
You know what? Let's come back to it. I just want to make sure I understand what you mean. Just as simple as we would say in Hebrew, pshat.
Yeah. Let me see. I would love to attempt an illustration to make real that teaching. And
illustrate
again,
me.
I would like to at this time make an attempt to show a kind of a receiving of the fullness of a Christian way of prayer from that's talked about from Marcus Borg.
Beautiful. Okay.
So he mentions that in the Christian tradition, there's songs and there's hymns to God, speaking of God like the God as it is understood, the God received in Christian tradition as the most beautiful, as the most exalted, right? And that today, religiously, that's kind of looked down upon, like as very arrogant, and there can be almost like, who are you, right? To put yourself up in that way and to demean and to belittle others. So people have actually stopped singing those songs in certain congregations, and they've rewritten new songs in other places, and there's all of this ferment going on. So I think that that's an example of seeing through the literal and losing the legitimate. What does this mean? He says, how many of you have been in love, married, or just been in love, have had a beloved? How many married couples may, if they're really married to their beloved, be able to say, my wife is the most beautiful woman? I think Brandy is the most beautiful woman.
Amen.
And shouldn't we, in a sense, want this, long and yearn for lovers to receive each other as the most beautiful? And yet, is it literally true? And most people know this. Like, literally, maybe it's not true. But
you told me about Brandy that it was.
It's legitimately true. It's legitimately true.
I got to say something, Vid? You're in such trouble now. I just don't know how you're going to possibly get out of this. I'm just going to be with there supporting you all the way, brother.
Holy wrestling later.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of, or, there's another difference between legitimate and literal might be it's all true and some of it happened.
Right. No, I think now I'm understanding more, what you were saying, and thank you for elucidating it. Elucidate me all the time. I mean, if I understand what you're saying is it's kind of like what one Rebbe, one Hasidic master, said when he was asked, are Hasidic stories true? And he said, anyone who believes every Hasidic story, right, is a fool. But he said, and everyone who disbelieves